Thank you. For those of you who don't know, I was the person who just got roasted, Mike Alvarez, and I'm really excited to be here with you all today. And like Betsy, wanted to welcome everyone, and to again point out that, as Betsy already said, that we are trying to have a different kind of conversation here today by bringing together people from all sorts of areas of academics, industry, stakeholders, and of course our colleagues from the election community, to have this conversation. And we want to have an open and frank conversation. We want people to mingle. We want people to get to know other people. And I am not the most outgoing and gregarious person in the world, but I do want to recommend that everybody try to follow the goal that I've set for myself, is to meet at least one new person today. So that's something that I'm going to try to do today, and hopefully you all do as well. So for this first session, we're going to start off with a guest who many of you know. I suspect I'm going to read a nice introduction here, but I think most of you know Commissioner Palmer. But joining us this morning is Commissioner Don Palmer from the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. Commissioner Palmer currently serves as chair of the EAC, and is the designated federal officer for the Technical Guidelines Development Committee, and was nominated to the EAC by President Donald Trump and confirmed by unanimous consent of the U.S. Senate on January 2nd, 2019. Commissioner Palmer has had a long and distinguished career, and I'm not going to read this all to you. But he's here today with us to talk about the role of the EAC in elections. For those of you who don't know what the EAC does, we'll talk about that. He's also going to talk to us more specifically about how the EAC is currently thinking about the role of AI in elections and what they're doing to facilitate the proper use of this new technology in election administration here in the United States. So, Commissioner Palmer, welcome.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate that. It's really good to be here.
Turn it off when you're not using it.
Turn it on when I'm using it, turn it off when I'm not using it.
Okay.
Is it on? That one's on.
This one's on.
That one's on? This one's now on. Okay. So we'll get started. So, Commissioner Palmer, thank you for being here this morning.
Michael. I appreciate it.
We're going to have this kind of conversational format here.
That's great.
And especially, we want to thank you for coming, especially given the federal government shutdown. That also was one of the great complications that Michelle's laughing that arose over the last couple of weeks that Michelle and Mariah were dealing with.
Sorry for the uncertainty. It's just it's uncertain.
It's not your fault. No, we're not going to blame you. I did want to mention before we get started that unfortunately, because of the shutdown, Steve Dachich, who's the chief AI officer for the EAC, someone who we'd really like to have in a conversation like this, was unable to attend. We regret that. Thank him for his interest in what we're doing here, and next time we'll have to have him here. So, Betsy.
All right. I'm going to wait for a second. There we go. My mic is now on. So I get to ask the question that everyone came to this meeting to talk about. So first, I want to hear you talk a little bit about the space of AI in election administration. Like, where do you think this could potentially have uses? Where are we stuck? And what are the dangers?
Well, I think that the dangers are the things that I actually have been focusing more on, because when I first met the incoming, he was the acting director at NIST. One of the first things he mentioned to me after the pleasantries is we started talking about how will AI impact voting systems, and how will AI what will the security posture of those voting machines. And from his point of view, we could very, very soon find ourselves outdated, right? And there would need to be changes. And it's ironic because, we are almost in a constant state of flux with election systems and voting systems. And for him, to say that to me, put that front and center as what will be what will be our response as an agency or as a community to that? How will the states handle that if suddenly we find ourselves left behind and not focusing on the security of it? I think that, you know, I think that the case uses of it, the uses of AI, it has a lot of potential. I mean, I have always been someone who wants to find efficiencies in what you do, right? And sometimes it's difficult. I mean, in the military or in federal government or state government, it usually has a reputation for bureaucracy, not necessarily the most efficient workforce or productivity. That's not always true. I mean, it's really, you know, the people you pick, you know, people you put around you. But that being said, AI has the potential of really making that process more efficient and making what we do more efficient and giving more tools to election officials that right now you're expected to have you know, competencies in a wide variety of areas that are other than just managing one or two people. And you know, they've got a whole, they have to be cybersecurity experts. They, you know, you've heard this before. There's a lot on their plate. And can AI help them do their job better for the voters, make them more productive? You know, as use of tax dollars, they're public servants. So if there's ways to make this process more efficient and easier and more secure, we should do that. But there is, I sort of think that there's, my concern is that certainly not me. I'm a political science major. I'm a lawyer. I try to delve into things and understand as much as possible, and we put people around us that have that expertise. But if you ask me tomorrow, what are the three biggest technical challenges AI could bring to voting machines, I'm probably not the best one to answer that question. It's like we have to start to focus on that, from my perspective.
Wait for my mic to turn on. Oh, there we go. So as I said earlier, you know, Steve, they just couldn't be here today. I think that one of the things that's really interesting about the emphasis that the EAC is placing on the role of AI is that you've created this position for Chief Officer for AI. So can you describe the role that Steve's playing and what the nature is of his job?
Well, Steve obviously is a former election official, a local election official. He's also one of our subject matter experts. He's one of our top folks in the clearinghouse division, and that's been a focus. And so and this is prior to the transition to in the executive branch, but we wanted to make sure that there was a focus on this because we saw this coming. And you know, and then there was sort of some requirements from the executive branch for an action plan, which I've seen a lot of movement on, not only for our own agency. How are we going to use AI as an agency, but also, you know, what's your plan moving forward to remove the obstacles or sort of the challenges of AI? And so it forced us actually to look inward and then, okay, what will this mean outward? And we have, you know, in talking with the Congress, you know, they had some interesting discussions on the Senate Rules Committee on this, and there were some areas of bipartisanship. And so what came out of sort of the draft bill, bipartisan bill, was something that, you know, it's like when they ask us, what can you do as an agency to forward and give us more of an insight on elections using AI and sort of the dangers and the concerns? We said, well, look, you know, we have this history of developing voluntary standards, guidance. We also, look, we could look back at 2024. We could do a report on, you know, what actually occurred and what didn't occur, what were, you know, but what are some of the ongoing challenges that we may see in 26 and 28. And so, you know, we have contracted with NCSL. Of course, everything's on hold because of the shutdown. But it's these things that we are moving to looking at 2024 and then beyond. And I think that from my perspective, this conference, you know, I really appreciated your opening comments because, you know, we have a great people at the AC, our former election officials at Clearinghouse, and we have experts in different things. But our boards are what really give us value. The ability to reach out and talk to state and local election officials, and then some experts at the board of advisors. And so this is the type of meeting, and that's the part of the ecosystem that's going to provide us those best cases, best uses of AI that have been successful, that we can share with local election officials and states, so they have sort of this feeling that, okay, it's been looked at, mitigated the concerns that they may have sort of incorporating AI into their process. And so I think that having Steve there is really organizing our approach to this. Because, and look, it's great because then you have like a governance board within the EAC. There have been ideas that have been shot down because we're not quite ready. Technology just isn't there. There's concern that, a mistake you could lose trust, not only in the federal government, but with the voters and the election community. So things are 2 steps forward, 1 step back, perhaps. There's a bit of cautiousness, but Steve is, he was rocking and rolling there for a little bit before we got the shutdown. Those are the type of things we're doing is like, can we do a focus group and talk to our boards about things like that? One of the suggestions we had was in the clearinghouse, one of the things we do is highlight sort of best practices and giving them awards for the innovation. And so if we made AI sort of a topic, it would give another incentive for election officials to show their work. What are they doing, using AI in the administration of elections, and then highlighting that with an award that the rest of the community can see and perhaps adopt themselves, which is the whole point of that process, that award process. But that's sort of what Steve is doing. Is there was a focus that we all needed to, as agencies, to do more on this to make the country a leader. I think that we can talk a little bit more about it, but there's, the election community is still sort of catching up, I think, with this. At least I am. When I read the newspapers and go online, when you see how much focus, billions and billions of dollars, up to $1 trillion of investment into AI, obviously some of the smartest people in our country feel this is the future of our economy. It's the next revolution, industrial revolution. And so I may not have been there a couple of years ago, but when our country is investing so much money in this to be a leader in the world, obviously we need to focus on, okay, what will our life be 3 to 5 years from now, or even 1 year? We have to think about that because obviously we are moving in that direction where this will change our economy. And if it's going to change our economy, it's going to change elections.
And I think that this rapid pace of change makes, I think in some ways, this a unique time. I mean, I've been around in this for 25 years. And right now it seems that the way AI is evolving, it's changing daily. I mean, there's something new happening every day. And I guess the struggle is going to be like, how do you develop policies that allow people to use AI, both in the workplace at the EAC, but give guidance to the folks in this room about how we can best use AI and mitigate the risks. So how do you and maybe Steve see the EAC's role in developing policy, especially given how rapid the technology is changing?
Well, I think that a lot of the work's being done at the state level in localities where they're actually using it and they find success. Sometimes there's going to be a failure. We may not know about that. But I think our goal at the EAC is really to identify those successful uses of AI and to promote that in the clearinghouse network. And so to give that comfort level to other election officials that are on the fence about whether or not I'm going to use AI, am I going to invest my personal time and energy of me and my staff to learn how to use this tool? And I think that as I personally have tried to use AI tools, I find myself, maybe it's just, I'm getting a little older, I'm stuck in my ways, but it does take some organization and it's like comfort level that this is going to work for me. And so I think that our role is to sort of say, hey, look, these are proven cases that AI can make your office more efficient. And you can trust this because you've had a number of election officials use it, states are using it. So these are things that you can be trained on, right? I think that in my mind, seeing how it works, working it, These are all things that give a comfort level to a practitioner that, okay, I can use this in my office. And so if we share that information of successful uses, we disseminate it to the community, they have the benefit of knowing that it's been verified. And so I think that's sort of the role that the EAC's played in a number of areas of the Clearinghouse Network in sharing best practices in the states. I do think that one of the things we've been pushing for, and you've probably seen this, is reports to Congress, right? Reports that are obviously available to the community, as well as doing a deep dive on it. And where are we post 2024? You know, we have the e-survey, we do different reports to the Congress. This is something that they're eager, the Congress is interested in knowing where we are in elections and with AI. And so I think that our team obviously could come together and put that together. Again, they have a lot of priorities. We don't want to push them too much, but this is the thing. We have focused a lot of our energy in making sure that a big part of Clearinghouse is going to be about the future of AI. And Steve is obviously the leader of that, and working with the commissioners, coming up with best products.
Can I have one more follow-up? Okay. Because you mentioned something that's really interesting that I never thought of, which is this idea of the U.S. being a leader, an international leader, right, in the use of AI in elections. Can you maybe say a little bit more about that? Are there other applications of AI in elections that you all have seen internationally that you find interesting and intriguing, and things that we might consider talking about here in the U.S.?
Well, they're having the same discussion. The Organization of American States recently had a meeting in Santiago, and AI was one of the topics. And AI, there was a big discussion that we need to have as well. What about our concerns, from a public policy perspective? I mean, this is not all about economics and efficiencies. I mean, that side of me, there's also concerns about human rights, bias in AI, perhaps. These are all concerns that some members of Congress have, and members of the international community have a real concern as what impact this will have, not only on their livelihood, the economic livelihood of a country, but their job. What will the impact be on workers? These are all issues that the international community is grappling with as well. I think it was a great presentation. Microsoft presented on some of the tools that are available now that election officials have sort of verified that this can be used in their office. And so that was encouraging to see that we're starting to see not just 2 or 3, right? Now it's like more than a handful. Right. So that's good. We're starting to get a baseline of products that are available that folks feel comfortable with. Now, I'm not pushing one vendor over another, but when one vendor or obviously tech giant is starting to lay out there that these are 5 or 6 uses of AI and some good advice too, really good advice for the election management of these countries about the use of AI. Do you want to just pull something that's open, or do you want to have your own internal use of AI? There are some real warnings that were provided to the different country election management bodies, and so we take that on board as well. Is that we want to pass that sort of information on to the states and localities, that there are some concerns that but also promises that are out there that the international community is also working through.
Thanks. So I have 2 questions that I get to ask, but I'm sure that you all are going to have some questions. And so as you have questions, Michelle has asked that we sort our questions by writing them down and passing them to Michelle. So that's why you have those notepads in front of you. So I feel like my question is going to be kind of pedestrian here, but I feel like, when we talk about AI, when I think about what this is, there are a couple of ways in which you could imagine AI deployed for election officials. And one of them is what you flagged in terms of operational efficiency. And that's something that I could imagine there's like universal support for, because it's your tax dollars at work. And then I can imagine there's a landscape that gets a little bit more complicated, which is in terms of engaging AI in terms of constituent support. And I wonder if you could just talk about those differences, like where you've seen stories of success and you've seen, some real risks emerging. And if you had suggestions for where, where should we be thinking about, where are there problems that are yet to be solved, and where are these award-winning solutions emerging?
Well, I think that in constituent support, it's a great area. And I think that going to your question is, I think that the fact that we waited a bit, I mean, look, the whole chatbot and the support has been available, and I think it could do a pedestrian job, right? But the problem is that errors, mistakes, or just wrong information, that sort of thing, that's really a sort of a no-go. Not that humans can't make mistakes either, but I think that, as I've heard and seen, is that the answers are getting better. The results are getting a bit better. And so where will we be in 6 months to a year, where the AI is much more intelligent, right? It's able to provide much more accurate, reliable information. And so I think this is going to be a big area, because we all know the phone centers, the creation of phone centers, the number of people, particularly in a large jurisdiction, that you have to have to answer phones, or the burden on local election officials that don't have the luxury of 10, 15 people to answer phones. This could really come in handy. And I got to tell you, now AI is almost pushed, if you use the internet at all, right? I mean, it's not being pushed on you regardless, right? So it's people are going to have this expectation that they can just talk into their phone, and an AI generated message on how to vote in my county, it's going to come up. And so that is coming. And because we are the trusted source, we have to be forward thinking on that. And so, like I said, things have been delayed even at the EAC for certain things, because it's like, we're not sure the technology's there. What if there's, we're not 100% there on the reliability of some of it. But if you fast forward 6 months to a year, I'm feeling we're going to be more comfortable with it. And there are ways to mitigate that risk of error.
I like what you said about mitigating the risk of error, because I feel like one of the things that we keep talking about with AI is like, we want to benchmark this to like an absolute truth. No errors are acceptable, but surely human call centers are also making some errors. So some level of error is acceptable. And I think it's a really interesting question to think about, like, where, like, what's an acceptable level of mistake, and how would we know what the level of mistake is that we're making now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that look, like I said, humans make mistakes. It's happened. Poll workers make mistakes. It's not always fireable, but sometimes it is. They make mistakes. And so I think that, you always have that precautionary disclaimer. It's like, here's the answer to your question, but look, if you have further questions, or please contact this number, right? So there's always a fallback. There's a way to call the office and talk to an individual, because not everyone in our society, AI doesn't always solve our problems, as we all know, right? It just doesn't in all areas of our interaction with the workplace, or with business. And so there's got to be that option anyway. And so, but I do think it will really reduce some of the strain on election offices if we could get the accuracy that, and there are some best practices, right, that reduce sort of errors, right? Some open AI, chatbot, it's open, it's susceptible to error, right? But if you have the ability with that software to create your own, it's much more likely to be extremely accurate. And of course, then we have the fallback. So I think that this could really reduce some of the burden in that area, because that's one of the big areas prior to an election. The fact that you have a phone center, you got to train individuals to do this. You're looking up registrations, you're providing precinct information. It can be very, it can be burdensome.
I actually share a lot of your optimism here, because I think this is a way that, without adding to the burden of running a big operation, you could have a 24/7 essentially call center. Like, it gives you a way to get information to people really quickly.
Well, look, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, I don't know how much you interact with the credit card companies or other, but sometimes it takes 2 or 3 phone calls to get something done.
Yep.
And so if a chat box gets me 95% there, and there's a way to get I mean, we're still doing better than most of America corporate here.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
I think it's fantastic. So I'm going to ask you 3 final questions and then it's audience questions. So here are my questions. I want you to give me an example of a problem. Where are you stuck? Like, what do you want to know that you don't know right now? Or where have you heard someone else is stuck and you wish like, hey, intellectual community that gathered here, what could you tell us that we don't know? A story of success that we might not know. So you got an anecdote for me, like, hey, you all should be paying attention to this team or this example. And then finally, I want to know how we can help you.
You'll probably have to remind me. My memory isn't that great.
Okay.
But what was the first question?
So the biggest problem.
Oh, yeah.
Biggest problem.
No,
Where
no,
are you
no.
stuck?
I come back to the one that I'm stuck on is, so what will quantum computing and AI, what are the exact threat vectors on voting systems, right? That's our primary core mission, right? And then election systems. What is that threat that we have to be prepared for? And so I can't, I need smarter people to tell me that, right? And then how do we develop those standards to sort of defend it and protect that? And I think that's generally the process, is that we as the election community have a responsibility to be careful and conservative to protect the election process that we have, even though there's great promise out there. Second question, what was it?
Give me an anecdote or an example of a success. Like where you're like, this is the greatest, or my greatest chance for where I think like we're seeing AI solve a problem or AI has solved a problem
But that we don't know about.
that we don't know about.
Huh.
We may not have heard about.
And it could be something as simple as an operational efficiency in the office. You're seeing something happen in your office or in someone else's office where you say like, this actually, reduced cost.
Well, the one thing that I've seen, and I think it has a positive and negative side to it, but I think I've seen, like, for example, when we do talk about, misinformation or disinformation that's out there or concerns of the public, I've seen much more AI generated responses from election officials, maybe on their LinkedIn site or on X. So this very eloquent 10 paragraph response to one little issue, right? And it's sort of like, all right. I think it's great because election officials now have the ability to put information in and say, hey, look, I like to respond to this concern. How do I do that? But I think consumers are a little bit wiser than we give them credit for. They're gonna like, that's not a personal response. That's a 10 paragraph AI generated response. It's just too perfect of an answer. And so, that's my concern about that. But, it's really good reading. It really is. It's much better. It'd take me a couple of days to write something like that. So, and so the third question.
Okay. How can we help you? So, how can we support your work? If we have stories of success, how do we get in touch? Like, how can we help you do the work you're doing?
So we are going to do, we're going to do this, we're going to do outreach. I talked about this, this contract that we have with NCSL to get input, from the community, primarily through our boards. But I was talking to the other commissioners. I'm still allowed to do that during a shutdown. They haven't, and it's like, look, it's the type of thing that, the Congress is looking for a report. They want to look to the future. How can we create like a task force? And it's like, how do we bring in people that are other than, in addition to the election officials that we have on our boards? How do we bring in experts, technologists that are in the community? How do we do that? And so that's really the issue. And I think just talking about the 3 concerns that I have, and it's really, we don't want to be stuck with the big L, right? We don't want to get left behind on the technology. And sometimes I feel that the Congress, we're not exactly first in line, the election community, right? We don't want to get left behind. We don't want to have less security, and we don't want to have a loss of confidence in elections. And so, talking to the Congress about, hey, look, the EAC is a bipartisan commission. They can develop some sort of standards and guidance and sort of reports to the Congress on where the election community is. The last thing I'll say is the election community and local election officials are using AI, and we want to have those cases, right, of how it's worked in a positive manner. But it's beyond that. Some of the obviously what's happening in universities and technologists, they have input on this that Election officials are sort of, we're consuming it. How would we use it in a real environment? But there's information out there that we may not be aware of, and we're not aware of, other than reaching out to the AC or to the election community, and we get it that way. But my hope is that perhaps we can do a task force where we can bring in different parties and groups to talk about this, just like we are doing here.
Thank you. All right, Michelle, do you have some questions over there for us? Has anyone given Michelle a question?
No one has any questions?
We just walk over.
He's got questions. Well, while we're waiting, to get these questions, when you're short of this task force, so a lot of the folks in this room know you and they attend the usual election conferences, so they see you or see members of the EAC. But for folks like in the academic world, like how do we funnel these comments to you? Like if we have thoughts, concerns, research reports, things that we would like to share, that we can make sure that they get into this conversation. How do we do that?
Well, I mean, obviously you could always reach out to us, but I think that, our clearinghouse team, they also go out to localities across the country and give training. Some have been on AI, but I think that like Steve Daish, who is our AI point of contact, our executive director, she manages our team on a day-to-day basis. She's, Brianna, she's great. And, but that's the best way. We also, we have a newsletter. I mean, look, I'm not trying to pitch our newsletter, but
No, go ahead and pitch the newsletter.
we have a newsletter, and it sort of gives, all you gotta do is EAC newsletter, and you can sign up for it. It just gives you that months of activities and ways, what's going on at the EAC, what's on upcoming hearings. You probably have a particular focus that interests you. Obviously, if it's AI, you can see what's going on. Like if we're going to have a hearing on this, if we're going to have a meeting on this, you'll get that sense. You can see what we've done in the past and what our products are. But the newsletter is the best way to sort of on an ongoing basis contact us. But I would say, if AI is your thing, I would say Steve Daich is that point of contact, because it's his responsibility to sort of help bring this, steer this train in the direction that we need to go as an agency. Obviously, working with the commissioners, trying to reach out to different interested parties. And so that's probably the best way.
Yeah, so once the government opens back up, we'll have to figure out a way to get Steve out in front of a lot of these folks. And I will have to confess, I did not know that you had a newsletter.
We have a newsletter.
So please pitch it.
That's
Yeah.
right.
I'm going to get on my computer and make sure to subscribe. Stephen Richter gave us a good question. It's a good question. Thank you. Election administration is inherently conservative, small c. You get blasted if you mess something up. You only get a pat on the back if you innovate. How do we change this and incentivize AI innovation in this field?
How do we incentivize? Well, again, I think that being a leader in AI, it's like there's got to be, folks have to take some chances. And again, I think I'm saying conservative, but take chances. I think there are a lot of localities in this country, election offices, that have more ability and authority to experiment. Places in Colorado, I mean, they have the ability to do things that a lot of states and counties don't, because of the way the state law is drafted. And so one of the things, I think that those counties, we have a reliance on them in a lot of technology areas, because if it can work in Utah, if it can work in Colorado, perhaps it can work in the rest of the states. Different states have different abilities. Like Virginia has the ability to do some testing of products. This is why when I came to the EAC, I sort of wanted there to be the research department more than just the EVE survey, right? I wanted the research to be in a controlled environment. We could test things and then provide feedback to the community. Now we're doing some of that with our ESTEP program, which is an evaluation program of election technology. And some in the EAC believe that our focus on AI should be in the ESTEP department, because it allows there to be a controlled experimentation and controlled evaluation of AI, and then we can provide that feedback. Instead of relying on certain counties and certain administrators across the country that have the ability to experiment. It's hard to, I mean, look, sometimes if you fail, you're just going to get hit in the face, you know, and you just got to move on. I continue to say we have to be a little bit conservative, and that's why I'm waiting for the technology to get a little bit better before certain things can happen. And frankly, also, it looks like we're not made of money either at DAC, right? It's like some of these things we can only do within the budget we have, and it's going to be the slow train, right? And instead of the bullet train, it's like, well, here's a amount of money focused on AI experimentation and best practices, and so we can only do what we can do within the environment of our budget. If that's where you guys can help too. You know, the Congress is always looking at our budget as well as the monies to the states. And the more that they can allow us to use monies for AI, the better. And I will say this as a plug to the other commissioners and to the leadership team at the DAC is back in I think it was 23 or 24, there was a debate about whether or not localities and states could use HAVA funds to strengthen their own communications when faced with AI-generated disinformation. And the EAC came together and voted that, yes, the states and localities can use that HAVA funds for that purpose. Communicating about what we do and how we do it is vital. And so if it needs to be in defense of AI-generated disinformation, the state sees that as one of their critical security needs, that yes, you can use that for that purpose.
I love the idea of using HAVA funds for this because it seems like exactly what that program was started for. Like, you know, that's brilliant. All right, this is a question from the audience. There have been several high-profile cases of chatbots getting tweaked and temporarily giving false information. This sometimes gets called a hallucination. It seems like even a small scandal like this could severely undermine public confidence in the context of elections, especially if the info was targeted in a political way. How do you think about protecting against such risk?
That's obviously my concern. One mistake could really hurt the entire community and sort of the future of that. And so I'm not saying that everything that we're doing is going to eliminate that risk. It's just that we just need to be cautious in the use of it. And look, I already see particularly large counties, and I mean, administrators are already taking this step, right? And so maybe it's just part of the risk of what we do. I mean, sometimes you're going to step on toes, you're going to make mistakes, and you're going to hear about it. And you just move on, you correct the problem, you move on. You know, I think that from my perspective, just being as cautious as possible while still trying to provide, you know, the products, and the positive case uses of this. And it's like, look, it is possible to use. And look, I think that sometimes the economy and sort of the efficiencies are too much to just overlook, right? It's like, okay, I know there's a potential error right here, but I feel comfortable enough with it. The savings that I can make with eliminating the data, you know, the phone call center, is they make these decisions as managers of the resources in that community. They make those decisions on a cost benefit analysis, and we correct those mistakes if they occur.
Thank you.
So I want to slightly follow up on that. We have an election in California coming up, and at least one jurisdiction that I know of has one of these chatbots.
Ron
The chatbot. And we had a lot of conversations in my research group at Caltech about trying to jailbreak Ron. Now, I've been around this long enough to know that, you know, if I do that, I could get myself in trouble with my good friend, the election official, who is using Ron. So how do we go about trying to figure out what the boundary, how well this chatbot works, without getting back into that situation we were in 20 years ago with the academics, the researchers, and the computer scientists having this very conflictual relationship with election officials? So how can we test these technologies out without getting ourselves back into that really problematic relationship?
Well, I think And that's a really good analogy. I think that because we're still trying to get out of that whirl of distrust, black hats, white hats, and just to give some context is, I think you need to provide a means to provide white hat information back to the community. And you're doing it in a way to improve it, not to openly criticize it publicly, right? Not that these things should be, black box, but it's sort of like voting systems. We're still trying to develop a means of white hat vulnerability testing, right? With that feedback coming back to the manufacturer or to the locality. We're still trying to create that because there's such distrust of researchers, right? And the impact on voting machines. And so we're trying to, at the EAC, we're trying to create a program for that. The Congress has looked at it with the Security Act. And getting to your question is, we definitely don't want to have that sort of relationship of distrust. I think it's just sort of like, look, we're going to try to manipulate this a bit. We're going to give you feedback and just give it to them in a manner directly to them to allow them to fix it, them and the vendor to fix it. That's sort of it really is sort of, are we there for the headline? Are we there for the headline 60 days prior to the election? Or are we there for, look, this is feedback to you to improve this? And look, I've been on the receiving end of it as a state election official. And, that's where over the years that distrust has been created. And we're still trying to create an environment where it's a positive feedback. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And just for the record, we decided not to do it. I said no over the objections of a number of people on my research group. So we did have a question and about standards in VVSG. It's a little bit off topic of AI, but you can, since we're supposed to be talking about AI, you can say I don't want to answer this here now. But they asked, could you talk about the VVSG process? In particular, does the timeline work given the need for sufficient time to prepare ahead of the midterms? In other words, like, how does the process work and the timeline, and
So-
how does it work in general? I think that's a good question.
So the BVSG is really a process that was put in place by Congress. It really had the EAC and NIST work together to create standards or updates to standards. And what we did in the and that was a process of election officials and experts to provide feedback on different standards, right, for the voting system by which they're tested to, and then that certification process if a state desires to use that certification stamp. The VVSG process a number of years ago, we were criticized that it would go on. And for example, we take 5 years off, right? And which actually makes some sense, but because you're waiting for you're waiting for technological change, you're waiting for one standard to be implemented. But what we found is that there needed to be an annual review of this. And so that annual review started like in 2023. So it's a way to look at what are additional changes due to technology, due to things that we found in testing. So that process has gone on. So now we look at it, we sort of look at it on an annual basis. It doesn't necessarily mean we go into a full-blown advisement from our committees and advisory boards, but it does mean that we look at this and what changes might be made. Now, when you think about the midterm, or like we just got through the 2024 election, the standards are really for the future, right? So the systems in place now were built on 1.0 standards, and now we have 2.0 standards, and we have a number of systems that are in testing and one that has been completed. And but when we talk about a 2.1 or a 3.0 years down the road, those are the future. So if you were to set a standard, like we're looking at 2.1, if you were to set a standard for that, let's say next year, that won't go into effect until literally manufacturers have built a system to it, plus localities start to purchase it. So it's really forward linking. It's not going to change what is going to happen. And I just don't think the timeline, realistically, the timeline doesn't work for a new standard. If you were to do it tomorrow, it's not going to be in place for 2026 because that's a future looking standard.
Any more from my end? Oh, I've got one from Ski.
One late breaking question.
Okay, we got one more question here. Oh, this is great. Are there any collaborative works with party representatives regarding AI use in election campaigns? So is there any understanding here of like the ways in which parties are using and deploying AI in terms of guidelines or standards, and that like that might implicate how the EAC is understanding what's possible. So like, are you collaborating with any of those parties? And if not, are you a little bit worried about how campaigns are using AI in terms of just simply running elections?
Well, like, again, I think this is a concern. I think it's a concern of the Congress as well. Sometimes it's a personal concern, not, and where there's actually bipartisan sort of concern, right? They don't want to be the recipient of deepfakes or, disinformation where they're the victim, right? And so
or strategic disruption.
Right. So I know that a lot of election management bodies around the world, they sort of have that function of like from a political money or political advertisements. Some of them are looking into the EAC. What I sort of focus on, and I know Steve has, is the dissemination of information by political campaigns and candidates. That's a revolution that's going on. How am I communicating with the voter, right? The citizen? How am I disseminating my information as a political candidate? Some of that applies to us because, yeah, we want to be able to talk to our community, right? We want to do it efficiently and effectively, but we're not in there, we're not political actors, right? So that's where we sort of separate. But I do think that is driving a little bit what congressional concern is. What is the impact on the political campaigns of this? We're sort of an afterthought. I hate to say it that way. We should probably be the primary concern. But I think that because even though we're an afterthought, the Congress is concerned enough to say, look, we want to understand how this is impacting elections. We'd like you to report on 2024. What is our concerns in 2026? Can you develop some best practices and guidance, some standards for the community? And so that was a bipartisan bill that came out of some of the discussions out of the Senate Rules Committee. And I think that's where the commissioners are. It's sort of like, look, we want to be responsive. But to answer your question, we're not in contact with the campaigns about how they're using it. You may be at a conference, right? Like this OAS conference, right? They're discussing how the campaigns are using it. And we're all sort of recipients of, well, is that true or is that not true? Is that AI or not AI? I do think it would help one of the things that was out there, and I think that a lot of folks can discern what AI is, not AI, but I do think there should be some sort of marking on election information, advertisements, or social media posts. It's like, this was generated with AI. That gives someone a sense that this is potentially something I need to look at, be more discerning about. And I don't think that's a huge, lift for, folks that want to use AI is to put that stamp on there. So I think disclosure is important. But because we're sort of separated from the FEC, that's sort of, there's some things that they can do in this area, but not a lot either. It's usually going to be disclosure or disclaimer, that sort of thing. So,
well, you kicked this conversation today off to a great start. So I wanted to thank you, Commissioner Palmer, and we will reconvene at 10 o'clock.